Frankie,
Yo,
hi,
Ian,
buddy, how you
how are
doing?
you? I'm good, man. How are you?
Podcast.
Woo!
How's it going, brother?
Ian's podcast. It's going good, man.
Big
It's going good.
podcast.
Yeah.
So, what are we talking about today? We're talking about a subject you and I have probably talked about more than any five subjects combined in business over the last 15 years. We're talking about assholes. We're talking about bad apples, bad seeds, problems on teams, and what managers get right, what they get wrong, how people
What
like
we've
us,
gotten right and wrong.
yeah, what we get right and wrong, and really how are these people allowed to hang around companies as long as they are, and why does that dynamic happen, and what does it really do to a team when it's left just unchecked? I think that's what we want to get into for a manager who's dealing with a team that has more potential, but it has maybe one person who's a poison or dragging it down. I think that's probably the subject of what we're going to get into a little bit today. And I think I'm just going to start real quick with my first experience out of college. My first job that I did, Frank, I was a sales rep in Chicago, and there was a more seasoned sales rep who I was the second person brought in. I was brought in to help expand the territory, and it was built where we were supposed to share the accounts. But every time I called on a new account and I would cold call, this guy would make up some story that was his old account and he knew the people from way back. And I believed it for months, right? I'd be like, oh man, I'm really sorry. I didn't know that Nestle was your account. And he'd be like, oh, that's okay. That's okay. I'm good friends with. And I would see him like go behind me and look up who I had called on and make it up. So it got to a point where I didn't believe him. I didn't trust him. He was doing nothing to help me. He wanted me to fail because he didn't want a second sales rep. So when I would call on new accounts, I would say, do you know, Holger Peterson? I would say that, right, every time. And if they said no, never heard of him, then I would be like, hey, do you know? And I'll make it up. And he'd be like, oh, yes. Great guy. He's been there for a few years. And I would have to start calling him. And I'm like, no, actually, I asked them and they said they've never heard of you ever. And it got to a point where there was just so much friction because he went out of his way to make me fail. And he was good. He could sell. He could have been such an ally, to our manager. But he was so selfish in himself that he was destroying the fabric of the team underneath it. And our manager didn't see 80% of what he was doing. And it really impeded my progress for the first year I was in that territory. And for probably a lesser person that, would have just sat back and not pushed back on it, someone would have left, right? Someone else would have just left and quit the team. And what good would that have been? So I had an experience with the first peer I had on the first team I had right out of college that was as bad as it could be. And it's really stayed with me as a lesson my whole career. So
For anyone watching the visual here, clearly they can tell the two of us are athletes. Finely tuned, physical beings. So you go through high school, you go through college, right? You got tons of buddies from your frat. You got all your boys from your football team and baseball team as a kid. Like, how different was that for you dealing with someone who was really just there to fuck you and not help you versus, because confronting that for the first time is really, it's a new experience.
I think what's a little different in business than, say a sports team, let's say a baseball team. If a baseball team is tight and there's a good player who's selfish and is a jerk, most teams will self-regulate, right? They'll self-regulate. They'll shut that person out. They'll, if not outright confront the person, right? Physically, if necessary, issue a code red, right? If you've been on a football team or a hockey teams, I've been on baseball. Normally a team with enough personality and enough confidence is just going to go deal with the problem without the coach ever having to do anything about it, because the team sees that the behavior is killing the team, and they'll just go deal with that guy, right? Whatever that means, right? Of whatever means necessary.
So a quick aside there, right? High school football, our best player is an offensive tackle. He's the only kid on our team that played D1, and he was a dick, and he used to pick on everybody. One day, this kid Griffiths came charging after him. We all had our helmets off with his helmet in his hand and just swung it to hit the kid in the head. Like, that's the type of pugilist justice that you can have on a sports team that you sadly can't do in business.
Yeah, I mean, you say in a fraternity, you say, even take like a college project that you're on, right? Everyone's been in a college group where there's 5 kids and one of them misses every meeting and, does no work, but the other 4 really need to get a good grade. And so they carry the 5th. But what I've found in that case, in most cases, the 4 will go tell the teacher at some point. We'll say like, look, right, we're either going to do some work or we're outing you that you've done nothing on any of this. And even a lot of college professors will even have a big part of the individual's grade be the rating from the rest of your peers on the project. But there's always one. If there's a 5-person college project, there was always one lazy ass kid that didn't want to do any work, and it would drive the other 4 nuts. But there was kind of always that vigilante justice, I thought, that the other 4 would go deal with the 5th, right? In whatever means necessary, they would deal with it. Whereas in business, it's much harder to go do something about it, right? Especially if your manager's not on board, there's no repercussions.
So we're going to progress here through this podcast, right? We're going to talk a little bit for this episode. We're going to talk a little bit about entry level to being a business owner and looking at it from different perspectives. So why don't we talk about specifically what did you do in that situation? And then by doing it, what did that give your manager the ability to do to kind of confront this person? And my guess is you're going to kind of land at the same place I'm going with this. But so if you were going to coach kids that are listening to this that are maybe younger than we are at the moment, does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? What can you do every day where it neutralizes this without physically confronting a peer?
So, it messed with my mind for a while because he was more experienced than me. I was young, and he was really just trying to get over on me at every chance he could. And so, but over time, I just realized if I keep letting this happen, I'm not going to have a job. I'm not going to ever sell anything. I'm not going to ever get anything done. And I just got frustrated. And I needed to sell some things on my own.
Right.
Get that confidence. So when I wasn't selling, I just put up with it and, got bullied. And he was a great salesman. He was banging out sales all the time. So going to my manager 4 months in and crying,
not going to get
and I had no sales. I had nothing to show. And here's his best salesperson who's killing it, making the manager's year, right, for the most part. I just sound like a whiner at that point, so I had to go get some results on my own before I could really push back.
That was going to be my take on this, right? You and I but we both had great success in our careers, especially in our corporate careers. And you and I never really talked about this, but when I showed up at NVR, I had a target on my back. I was this kid coming from Florida, nobody knew who I was, but I knew what I was talking about because I had a major and an upbringing that was very similar to the job. So I knew stuff when I showed up on day one where they usually hired English majors and business majors. So people would be targeting me, and my mid-level managers, people a rung above me, were the ones who were the most threatened. But what I learned was just block that out and perform. You can't bitch, you can't do any of that stuff up front. You really need to just get your footing. Don't let it bother you. And then where I was kind of going with this question is, what happens over time is you shine in a way that your manager can't ignore it. And then what happens is that salesman who's a prick or that other guy who's blocking you, people realize you're magnanimous, you're better, and opportunity starts to fall in your lap because you just blocked out the bullshit. And a good manager knows that that guy's a prick and he's blocking you, and they giggle with you like, how was that? But like a not so good manager won't see it, but someone above that person is a better manager, and they're going to be like, no, that guy, Ian's a performer, Frank's a performer, the other people aren't. And that's been my experience. Just go do the job and be irreplaceable. And if you do that, the jerks lose power.
Yeah, I mean, that's really well said. It's hard when you're in that moment and you're not getting results and you feel like it's unfair. Someone on your team is doing something unfair, but it's until you go deliver, until you go put some numbers up, some results, no
You're
one's
just
going
a
to care.
complainer if you start belly aching too soon.
No one's going to care. So what I had to do was block him out. I had to ignore him. I just ignored him. I didn't respond to his emails. I didn't really talk to him much in the office. I made sure to cover my tracks when I needed to. And it was a lot of wasted energy and time. But as soon as I started getting results and I ended up building a better relationship with my boss, you've met Connors, right? I built a good relationship with him, but I didn't build a good relationship with him because I was buddy and we both liked baseball. He liked me because I started producing results just like the other guy. I was growing and I was putting numbers up, and he saw that I was doing it the right way. I was going out of my way to help the team. I would go to other cities, show him things I was doing. I'd lead things on calls. I wasn't political like the other guy. I did it right.
You did the damn job.
But I built a reputation to where I had as much of a voice, if not more, than the other person. And ultimately, long story short, I became that person's boss. I was promoted 3 years after I started to sales manager. And now the guy who was trying to block me early, who I knew was a snake, he was now reporting to me. And his tune couldn't have changed more because he knew I knew every one of his dirty secrets and what he was going to do to other people. And I made sure to cut him off at the knees, that couldn't happen. He couldn't do the same little tricks. He couldn't snow me like he snowed his manager before and other people around the office, because I'd seen his tricks. And I just did my job. And I didn't have the same results as him. I was promoted. I didn't sell more than him. He had more volume than me, he had more revenue. But I grew mine more, and I was a leader in how I did it, and that's how I ended up being his boss.
So this morning I was walking job sites with Dylan, my nephew. My family's in town this week, right? And Dylan's 14. He's my nephew. He's my little buddy. And we're walking job sites, and we get in the car, and he looks at me and goes, "Man, Uncle Frank, you know a lot." And I didn't used to know shit, but all the things that we're talking about, you got to learn. And then if you have a memory, you store it and you take away a lot of the crap. And then what you start to realize is as your career builds, the only way you can do it is do it. Like start, do it, chunk away, shut your mouth, take the crap, keep moving. And then don't forget the lessons. Realize the stuff you've lived through, other people are probably living through it too. Have empathy, have your eyes open. And that's what takes you from being someone who's decent to someone who can be great. If your goal is to run a business, you got to do that stuff. If your goal is to move up the corporate ladder, you got to do it. I mean, Ian and I have both flown up corporate ladders. Ian with 2 companies, me with 1. But we joke that we both had a lot of lateral promotions, but in honesty, we both
mainly you with lateral. I was always up.
Thus the dynamic of our relationship. Ian really can't see very well out of either eye. But to that end, those are the little things you start to learn. You realize this guy's a snake. I got to just work. But then you start to see it as an empathetic manager. You didn't let him get away with it. And you probably manage. So you become his manager. How do you manage around that for that team? How do you make sure he's not doing it to others?
So I didn't have this confidence with any of my other direct reports except this guy when I started. So I had such a problem with this guy, and I was so irritated by him. He was a villain in my mind for 3 years. And then I get promoted and he's in my office, the first guy in my office, right? I'm so glad. I want you to know I was a big advocate for this promotion. I told Bob that you were the guy for all bullshit, total horseshit. I was the last guy he wanted because he knew I knew all of his dirty secrets. And I just knew this is the way this guy operated, right? Now that I'm the boss, he's trying to snow me. And I didn't have this confidence with any of my other 10 direct reports in the first one, but I looked at this guy and I was like, for 3 years, you tried to pull one over me. You stole accounts from me. You lied about accounts to our boss. You lied about things I was doing. I'm not forgetting any of that. And you're not going to pull any of that shit while I'm your boss on anybody. And if you do, I'm going to find someone that can replace you, because I know your results are replaceable. I know your accounts. I know if I'd have had your accounts, I'd have got the same results. I was, just blunt in his face that, look, man, you're changing, or I'm going to find someone else. And I didn't have that confidence with anyone else but him, because I had so much animosity built up towards him. And honestly, he was not a problem for me. He didn't say much that. He didn't argue with me. He kind of nodded, but just right out of the gate, I looked him in the eyes and said, you're on such a short leash. It's outrageous. Like, don't try to snow me.
So you had the ability to confront him. I didn't. When I was doing the timeline here, you're 25, 26, and you literally confronted this dude. The way my career worked is by 25, 26, I've been promoted, but I was moved to a different division. So I had different enemies, and I didn't have the ability to do what you did. So what I think is important for people to realize is this: kind of like you need to shut your mouth at first when you start a job. You can't be the one who complains, so you're never going to get promoted. It might not line up the way it did for Ian, and it didn't line up that way for me. But at 25 to 45, I handle these things very different. Angelo and I had a conversation. Angelo's my number 2. He's incredible, right? So he and I are having a conversation a couple of days ago about a subcontractor we work with. And the manager lets the people on staff get away with murder. And he said to me, he goes, you don't let people get away with that. And we perform better. Like the guys making excuse after excuse after excuse. Like, you've got to eventually be able to confront it. You can't do it too soon, because you could set yourself on the wrong course. But if you earn the ability to confront, then you can confront. You had the same guy that you could confront. For me, it came later. It probably came in my low 30s, when I could be like, close the door, bring you in, talk one-on-one, and be like, look, you and I both know what you're doing, and it's not better for the team. Before I expose you, you got to fix this. And if you don't, or you don't want to, it's fine. We'll find someone else. And it's the same conversation you just had. You're sitting on a gold mine over there in that community or on that account. I can find a monkey who can do it, and people are going to like the monkey a hell of a lot more than you. But that comes with a shitload of experience. Like, think about how your chest pounded and how scared you were to give that feedback the first time. Like, am I going to get punched? Are they going to call my boss and they're going to find me out as being a fraud? Like, all of these things go through your brain when you're having that conversation for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my biggest weakness as a new manager was not dealing with assholes. My bigger issue was the person who couldn't perform, but they were trying their hardest. They had a big heart. They cared. They were just wrong person for the wrong role. That's the person that I've screwed up on over and over and over, is hoping that I could, and this is ego. It was, I can help them. I can fix them. I can make them better. And everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. And that's a weakness of mine, is that the person who just, I know, is working so hard. Like, when I took over that team, there were all kinds of different people. And there were several that when I came into that role, I just thought were the nicest people in the world. And I knew that they had no chance of ever being good in the job, because I'd watched for 3 years as a peer, and I just knew they were wrong people for that job. And I did nothing about it, right? I just tried and worked my butt off. A strength of mine has always been just knowing the snakes and just confronting them really quick. That's me personally. I'm a little bit more. There's another guy, he was in Iowa, and this guy just talked trash about our boss every chance he could get. He was just the guy who'd be on a conference call and he'd be like, hey boss, that sounds good. We're out here working. And then when the boss wasn't around, I'd be like, these budgets are bullshit. He doesn't know anything about our business. What value does he add? And so you just knew once you're the boss, this is what this guy's going to do to me. So I didn't trust him right out of the gate. I didn't like him. I made life miserable on him until he left. I got him out of the business because I just knew, I know exactly what you did to the last boss. You're going to do it to me. I don't trust anything you say. So for me, it always came a little more natural. What didn't come natural is, cutting ties with someone who had every behavior that you could ever ask of the company and had zero idea how to get results. That one was super hard for me.
So that's not the asshole. That's the opposite of the asshole. And one of the things, but I think it's prudent to discuss here, right? So that moment for me, when I learned that I had to fire people I liked, came in 2006. I was in home building. The market was melting down. I got promoted. I was running a division of 75 people. And 60 days after, I get promoted to run this division, I got to go fire 75% of that group. And you and I have never talked about this, but this is something we have that's similar. Your mom is an educator who became a principal. She was a school teacher who became a principal. My mom is the most kind elementary school teacher you've ever met. Both of us are reared in that environment. Both of us are in the environment of, I will take chicken shit and turn it into chicken salad. And that's ego. When a market shift happens or something bad goes on around you and you realize, I can't do that. I can't keep making excuses for these people. And there's a moment of preservation that comes in. Like one of my realtor contact friends goes, preservation is undefeated. I was probably 31, 32. And for the first time, I remember being like, if I don't fire those people and make my team better, they're going to fire me. Yeah. And that's a light bulb moment. And then when you get to that point, so you and I have both riffed hundreds of people, sadly, right? Like I riffed a bunch of people in my business a couple months ago when coronavirus hit. It's real. You have to do it. The easiest conversation is this one. You and I both know this really isn't working, right? And if they're going to know. Everyone's scared, like how am I going to pay for dinner and like how am I going to pay my mortgage? But I've had that conversation a couple dozen times. It doesn't fit always, but that person that you like as a manager and you have to let go, but they don't have the skill set, they've realized it. It's kind of a relief.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's no one, you never just have that conversation out of the blue.
No.
Unless you're lousy, right? Unless you're a crappy manager and you're that scared to ever look someone in the eyes. But by the time you do that, you've probably talked to them about their performance 100 times, right? Just little things that, hey, you're late again on this deadline. Hey, I can't have customers keep calling me. Like some of them are soft, but you're bringing it up. Some of them are, man, this is 4 months in a row. You've not hit your target. You have to get better. But by the time you get to the one you just said of, you and I both know this isn't working. There's been so many lead up conversations that, you're in essence saying you're going to be happier somewhere else. You can't enjoy talking to me about your performance every day. You just can't.
It's kind of like the same it's the exact same process as sales. There's a lot of opens and there's a lot of small closes before the big close. It's the same way with this. Now, the goal here is let's talk about assholes. Any employee, any asshole, it's not like, most of us, you and I, neither of us married our wives on our first date. That's just not the way it works. All of this stuff is progressive. It's got to have, step by step by step by step. But when you're going down that road, it's the little conversations, the little feedbacks. So specifically in dealing with an asshole, you got to confront it. You got to earn the ability to confront it. And then when the time is right, you got to confront it. You and I have dealt with this as entry-level people with peers, as entry-level people with a manager 1 or 2 steps above us. There's a lot of blockers who will deal with that stuff. Like when I was a project manager, I had a costing manager and a production manager both over the top of me when I was at Ryan. And they were dicks. They were absolutely dicks. and they were doing everything they could to work against me. They thought I was coming for their jobs. And guess what? They were right. I got the job. But you've got to you got to weather the storm, earn the skill. When someone's above you, you've got to be able to kind of shut your mouth and get around it. When they become peers with you, you can become a little bit more, I think you can become a little bit more vocal. When you become their boss, then you can have the conversation you had with that sales rep of, you close the door, you do it privately, and some people are reformed. A lot of people aren't. But that's the kind of stuff. But if you don't deal with this stuff, your life as a manager goes to hell. This is the piece of advice you gave me when I became a division manager. So I was a vice president. I'm in charge of a profit center. And you're like, go fire somebody. And that you came from GE. That was the GE way. The Ryan way, that wasn't real. I didn't think I could do that. And I didn't. And it perpetuated for a while. But if you can do that and show that you are the boss when you are in that role, it really gives you the ability to kind of, then when you go slap somebody on the wrist, they know you're not screwing around because you've already done it.
When you did finally fire someone, when you were in that division vice president role, did you feel a change in the way the team looked at you or communicated with you after that happened?
The first one, no. But when I let someone go who was this asshole, yeah. Because you often have this asshole performer. You have an asshole who performs. So what you do is they're like, we can't live without that person. And then what you do is you lop their head off. Are you as good day one? No. Is there continuity? Does the team rally together? Like you and I were talking about sports analogies, right? That's like the Bryce Harper example. They lost the best player on the team, but the collective was way better, and they go out and win a world championship without him. So that happens a lot on teams. And what happens is kind of like in sports, you always hear the term next man up. If you've done the right thing in your business, you get rid of that problem. You get them out of the way. There's an adjustment period. But then if you're a good manager, you got 2, 3, 4 people you can lean on, and you have individual conversations. You say, that person is now gone because I believe in you. I think you've got the skill. I think you're sitting on something and you're not letting out your full potential. I think you can grow. I think you can be more. I want you to step up and lead. And the cool thing is you can have that conversation with more than one person. And if you do that, that is the conversation I had, Ian, in 3 or 4 models with sales reps. But I see so much out of you. 1 or 2 of them did it. 1 or 2 of them stayed about where they were. But that absolutely happens.
Yeah, my first management job, I interviewed with like a vice president, someone high up, someone 2, 3 levels up from me in our corporate office in Connecticut at GE. And at the end of the interview, it was pretty clear that he liked me and I was getting this job. And I said, what's a mistake you made right out of the gate? What as a new manager. And like for this guy, it was like 30 years ago when he was a new manager, right? He had gray hair. He'd been in this job. He worked with Jack Welch for 20 years already. So, he's good manager, right? Got good executive. And he was like, well, I'm going to give you the same advice I give everyone, the same advice I gave you, Frank. He said, let me ask you a question. You're going to be managing your peers, right? I said, yes. He said, is there someone on your team that you just know isn't going to make it? They're not suited for the job. They're not performing, and they'll never perform because you've seen it for 3 years. And I said, yes. And he was like, calm down, because I was nervous. I thought he was going to put me on the spot and say, what's his name, right? And he didn't. He was like, calm down. I don't want to know his name. He goes, I'm telling you right now, help that guy find a better opportunity than what GE has to offer for his background, for his skill set. Help him find something else and do it quickly. He didn't say run out and fire the guy, shoot him. He said, that guy's not happy. You're not going to be happy with him. Don't try to fix anything. Just say goodbye. And I didn't, of course. I didn't take his advice, and he told me I wouldn't take his advice. And for a year, I tried to fix this guy. And I spent all my time in his territory, and, he got 10% better, right? But he was still failing. And, I didn't do what I was told to do. and I paid for it, right? It got to a place where, like you said, I wasn't performing as a manager because I wasn't dealing with something. Now, that was a different, that guy wasn't a jerk. What I've learned over time is to go fire the jerk on the team as fast as you can. Even if they have results, every manager should have certain just non-negotiable behaviors that they expect from every employee. And on most teams that have been left unchecked with a soft manager, there's someone who's getting results who exhibits none of those behaviors that you expect. And when you let that person just keep defiling and just fouling up what you say you expect from people and the culture of your company, just because you're selling out to get results, you tell your team that actually those behaviors are not that important, because as long as you get results, you're cool. And those people end up feeling protected, and they become more of a bully, more of a jerk, more of an a-hole. And until you do something about it, you're not really in charge. They are.
So I agree with you completely. And what I've learned over time is that both of those people need to go. But the asshole needs to go first. And especially if you're a new manager and you know, let's just say you had a time machine, you're Doc Brown, you have a DeLorean, you can go back. And you had that salesman that you could have let go. And I've had the same experience. So that person who blocked you, other people pay attention to that. And it makes an enormous statement as a manager when you let that person go, especially if that person is a producer. I mean, we've dealt with that multiple times. We've dealt with it in business, like working in NVR. I've dealt with it in multiple roles there. I've dealt with it in my business with small people who have a lot of leverage over you. That's really, really hard to do, but it makes an enormous impact. So I want to talk about something else. You walk in, you lop that person's head off. This is what happens if you've got the right people on the bus. You can go have the one-on-one conversations with, I need you to raise your game a little bit. But what happens invariably if you've got the right team built, the right culture, is people come to you and say, hey, Frank, hey, Ian, I know you let go of so-and-so. I'm ready to step up. That happens a lot. And that's when you know you've built something pretty cool. As a man, you can do this as a manager managing a segment of business, as a section of business. You can do it as a small business owner. Those are really cool things because people know that, hey, we had a producer. They don't fit, but this gives me a chance. And the sooner you can do that stuff, the better off you are. And I mean, I can tell you this, like living through it sometimes sucks. I fired a business partner. I had leverage over him. I owned the business that was a minority partner. I had to fire that person. That was brutal for like 4 months. Life is so much better now. Like you got to deal with it. The person wasn't necessarily, it was the wrong cultural fit. He had the wrong temperament for the job. He wasn't necessarily an asshole, but it's like you do that stuff. There is pain sometimes, but on the other side of it, it's so much better.
This specific person sends such a message about your character as a leader when you deal with this. So you remember when I came into NVR, mortgage company was largely broken, but the most important pieces that were broken that our CEO brought me in for was customer service was a joke, right? People just didn't care about customers, and teamwork was awful. It was just disjointed. No one talked with each other. There were silos everywhere. And so the CEO was asking me to fix this. So as I come into a new region, when I moved out to DC, I'm preaching the gospel of the CEO that brought me in, right? I'm preaching customer service, teamwork, all of these things. And there was an ops manager who was really good. She'd been there for 10 years. This was in Fairfax. And she was very protective of her team. So anything I would ask of everyone to do, sales or operations, I would ask everyone to do it. She would take it as, well, that's sales' fault and that's not our problem, everything. And I addressed it with her a few times, like, look, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm saying we as a team need to get better at this. But she could not get over it. So she tried to derail everything. And the other managers were on board, but she felt very protected because she'd been there a long time. And she did have very strong vocational chops, and her team did like her quite a bit, right? So they liked her because she was mother hen. She protected everybody.
She's a player. She's a player's coach.
But she was miserable to the concept of teamwork and ultimately customer service. Because if you can't, in a home builder, if you can't get all the different components talking together and working well together, the service is broken. And so, I addressed it a few times, but probably 4 or 5 months in, I just finally sat her down and said, we're splitting offices and I'm moving you completely away from your team. And if you don't like it, you can give me your notice. But honestly, I don't care. I was just so fed up with it. And this is maybe 4 months in, and right there on the spot, she gave her notice. And we didn't blink. Like, we got better immediately after that. And she, in her mind, had created this narrative that this company can't live without me, which is ludicrous. There were 600 people in our company. Like, any company moves on from any employee always. But that was the biggest move I could have made, is telling her team, I'm not, we got a new, she's been undermining me at every step. We're moving on. And you all need to understand why she's gone. I made sure to clearly tell them, this is why I made this decision. And you need to get on board with this new concept of what we're doing. And some of them left. Some of them said, we don't want to be here. If she's not here, we're gone. But the truth was, I didn't care. Get on board. This is what we're trying to do. This is the new culture. You're either with us or you're against us. And some people didn't want to be there.
There's two critical things I think to talk about here. First of all, when you do that first thing, it's like, I'll use an example of skydiving. Like, you jump out of the plane and you don't know if you're going to fucking make it or not. Then you pull the ripcord and you're like, all right, at a minimum, I'm going to live. If I crash into the earth, I'm probably going to crash into a way where I'm going to be in a wheelchair drinking my meals through a straw, but I'm going to live. And then you actually touch base with the ground in a comfortable way, and you're like, okay, I made it. That's what firing that person feels like. Because like if you've never done this before, you got to think about that. It's like, am I going to live? Okay, I'm going to live, but how am I going to look like my former self or not? And then when you realize you're going to do it, it gives you the confidence to do that shit again and faster the next time because of it. The second thing is this, and you just said it so well. As a good leader, don't miss the opportunity to reset the frame. This person, deal with it. This person is no longer with us. Management 101 says you never give feedback about an individual to a group. However, I will be very respectful of the now deceased, but I want to talk about what wasn't working. And you do it broad. You don't point the finger at that person. You say, this is what was broken. This is what I expect. New leaders will rise through the ashes if you meet these expectations. And these are the type of things good managers do. You don't miss the opportunity. And some people be like, I wish I could have gotten off the phone or whatever. Fucking go get a different job. But that's the moment where you recraft the narrative. And if you're not lazy about it, you really start to make something that happens. These are those little pivotal moments that stack on each other. And a decade later, it's like, connect the dots. And that's where you've gotten. It's so critical.
I think that management 101 advice of don't talk about the deceased, I think that makes sense for people that were good culturally, that were good behavior people. I think that makes sense for people that were performing and you had to make a decision, or maybe they made just a dumb mistake, but they were overall good people.
Right.
I think that management 101 advice of not talking about it, that HR is going to tell you don't ever talk about it. I think with the asshole, that's the exception. I think if you were really an asshole and you were really bad for culture and everyone knew it, I think you pull that team together and you say, I want to make something clear. This was my decision. It was based on the way this person was behaving. I'm not okay with these 3 or 4 things that were happening, and it's going to change, right? And everyone should understand that I made a decision based on a performer because of their behaviors. Your results will not trump bad behaviors, and I will list the behaviors that I did not like from that person that left, and tough shit if they don't like it. Because that's an opportunity missed. if they're gone and you leave everyone guessing, why are they gone? What happened? Did they, did something happen behind the scenes? Nope. Let me be really clear why we're moving on to the next one. And that's it. But that's what that specific niche. I would never do that with someone who was just a good person, good behavior, and they just couldn't get results. There, you flower it. You be as nice as you can.
That's right.
People are paying attention. Like, why would you rip that person? They're a good person. That the team won't like that.
So let's talk about what happens when you do that. So you take this opportunity, you communicate it, and you say, we've excommunicated ourselves from this person for these reasons.
Yeah.
The next piece of dialogue is, you as individuals deserve better. And I will provide you with better as a leader. And not only that, if anyone acts this way, it isn't acceptable. But I think so highly of you as a team that that person couldn't be here because it was degrading and taking away what you do every day. I look at this group and I see a group. I've had this at my business. I have a group of people who are unified and working together, and I have someone who's fucking selfish and they are working against them. And I think too highly of that group to let that talented person take away from this continuity. And that's my way of stating it, Ian. I've said it more than once, but it sets the tone of, if you become a jerk, we'll figure it out without you. But at the same time, you breed huge loyalty with your staff when it's like, I value you. I value this team. This superstar performer is the wrong fit. You guys can do it without them. And it's like, that makes a big difference. But that's something you asked me, like the first time I did it, I didn't deliver it as well as when I delivered it 90 days ago, because I've been through it so many times.
Well, and it's, there've been a lot of studies on this of what bad apples do to teams. And I think something you just touched on, you said it's not fair to you. That's what creeps into a team. So when someone is allowed to behave outside of the norms that the manager has set, there's a feeling of unfairness. So the team thinks this isn't fair, right? Either, let's say that person doesn't work as hard as everyone else, comes in late all the time, right? Leaves early, takes 2-hour lunches. Well, to the rest of the team who's taking a half-hour lunch and getting there on time every day, they're thinking, this isn't fair. This person, it's the same feeling you have when there's 5 of you in a college group and one doesn't do the work. There's fairness. Or I'm being told I should behave in a certain way as a team, and a teammate of mine is a terrible teammate and no one does anything about it. This isn't fair. You get this, teams get a feeling of helplessness, and then and that's the first feeling. And maybe they'll bring it up to you, maybe they won't. But what they start to think is, you're a weak leader. You say things and it's all empty and you won't deal with it. And that's not fair. And there's no vigilante justice in business. The manager has to deal with some things. It's not the same as some of the things we were talking about earlier with sports teams and other, in the military, whatever it is. There's a feeling of unfairness. So when you deal, when you deliver a message like that, Frank, that's awesome, because you're saying, the status quo was not fair to this group. You're better than this. And here's why I'm moving forward. And the team gets a whole new respect for you, that you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of results to make the company better long-term.
So let's talk about, you own a small business, right? And you're wedded to somebody. So like, I got 27 employees now. One departure, a high-level departure would really hurt. But a mid-level, low-level departure doesn't hurt as bad because you're a little bit more insulated. But when I had 6 employees and I had an asshole in a role, like, it really hurts to let that person go. And sometimes you live with it. And not only do you live with it, you're living with it. Everyone else knows you're compromising. So the reality is, you go cut that person and then you cut off your nose to spite your face. Sometimes you can't do it. I've had this with an office manager. I've had this with, someone who ran a segment of business. I've had this with a salesperson. And this is where chemistry comes in. And what I mean by chemistry is add and dilute. If you can get to a point where you can have 3 salespeople, then you can hold that asshole accountable. If you have someone who can fill in for that office manager, but in some of these instances, it's really hard and you just got to take it. Like, my wife has told me, 5 years ago when I met her, 5, 6 years ago when I met her versus now, she's like, you come home from work happier and you've got more competent people around you. Sometimes as a small business owner, you gotta just deal with it, and you gotta, it's slings and arrows.
You have to move slower. The smaller the team you have, the slower you have to move to go address a poor hire or someone who's just fallen off the rails, because you can't, there's not enough hours in the day for you to handle whatever you've asked them to take on.
Here's a manifestation of this. I've been in business for 11 years. My longest tenured employee is 4 years. If you were good enough to work for me in 2015, you are no longer good enough to work here in 2020. It's just the way it is. I couldn't attract the right people. I couldn't pay the right people. I didn't have health benefits. I didn't have that stuff. Now we do. We get a higher class of employee because of it. And now my tolerance is so much lower for bullshit, because I know that it's a great place to be. But there's that period in the middle. It's kind of like when you first start a job and we said you got to shut your mouth. It's one of those things you got to just weather as you're starting off if you run a small business, because you don't have the bench, you don't have the HR department. You can't move as quick.
Yeah, if you're a 3-person company, right, and you have a little bit of office space in the same building as Salesforce.com, and someone interviews with both of you, who's winning, right? You're not going and luring away that employee from a big, well-trusted brand for someone, so you compromise a little bit in the beginning, versus what you had to work with when you were at a Fortune 500 company. But that doesn't mean it needs to be permanent, right? It just means you're going to be a little slower in how to deal with it.
Fundamentals are still the same.
But that's, a lot of those folks just didn't have the bandwidth, Frank, to keep up with what you were doing. But even when you were a 3-person company, you did take jerks out of your business, because you would rather sacrifice a bunch of revenue than have your name is on it. Your dad's name is on your company. And if you got a real jerk, right, who's stealing from you or just behaving horribly, you got to deal with it, because that's your name. That's you still have to deal with it. You don't just compromise forever.
No, you said it the right way. It's slower. Like I was over a barrel for a period of time with a couple of malcontents because I didn't have a bench. But if you can build a bench, you can do it. So in any aspect of business, this is relevant. It's real. You got to deal with it. No matter if you work for companies with 3,000-4,000 employees like Ian and I both have, GE's got more than that, or if you've got a 25-person company or a 5-person company, like these things are real, and you got to be able to confront it. And you might not be able to act as quickly, but you need to be able to say, it's kind of like letting your kid eat sugar at every meal. It's not going to age well. You got to just deal with it.
Yeah, no, 100%. For the sake of time, to kind of wrap up this specific episode, Frank, I'm just going to bring it home with 4 points that we've talked about today. 1, if you're a manager, you can't sell out. You can't sell out for performance. If you're a sales manager, you have 10 sales reps, and your best sales rep is miserable for your culture and is just a bully and bad, you have to suck it up and take that person out and replace them with someone with behaviors. You can't sell out for money, or your team won't respect you. 2, you can't think that the impact of a bad apple is siloed, that it's not impacting the rest of the team. You'll get less effort from the rest of your team. You'll get the same behaviors out of the rest of your team. It will infect everything. That bad apple turns into a whole batch of bad apples.
There are unintended consequences of not dealing with it that are usually worse than just lopping off the limb.
100%. You're telling, 3, you're telling your team your values as much through action as you are through inaction. So refusing to take actions tells your team that you value results and money more than building a good culture, a good team, or it tells them that you're just too weak to deal with confrontation. And in either way, that's probably not a place you want to be as a manager. And then, 4th is just, most new managers struggle with avoidance. I'm going to go focus on other areas of the business, and maybe this will just get better on itself. typically with this individual, there's zero chance it's just going to get better in a vacuum. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to create more problems. So whether you're a small company or a big company, if you're small, you're probably going to have to move a little bit slower, but you still have to do it. The longer you wait, the bigger the problem is going to snowball and the more it's going to cost you in the end.
Yeah. And the most valuable resource any of us has is time. Having this asshole on your team costs you valuable time. And you can't do the things that make the business special. And you can't do that. You're wasting time on this crap, where if you can get to a point where you can cut it off and move on, it's addition through subtraction. It's a huge, huge thing. But being empathetic, it's not easy. We've all dealt with it and been very scared to confront that person. That's normal. It is very, very normal.
Yeah. And the one thing I know for sure is, Frank, you're not an asshole. You're a good guy.
Both of us have moments, but it's...
I didn't say I'm not. I'm a total asshole. Someone should have fired me years ago. They just didn't. They didn't take the chance.
That's right.
All right, man. It was good seeing you, buddy.
Always a pleasure.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.